Hi, welcome back. We're at the last outline of Section 3, Research Technical Implementation in Chapter 5, Framework and Research Design. In this outline, we're going to discuss the design of research, and I do believe one of the most important aspects of research is to understand the design of your research. Now, to illustrate the actual categories of design of research, I would like to take you to the visual presentation. I have split the screen into two spaces. I'm going to start to illustrate the previous example that we have discussed earlier on, and that's having a teacher with some sort of specific backgrounds. I will call them X1, X2, and XM, and those X's like the A's and the education background. Then we have also seen teaching methods, and we defined actually three teaching methods: teaching method 1, teaching method 2, and teaching method 3. And then we have seen finally students' performance, and of course we are identifying two forms to evaluate, and that's by students' grade or score and performance or application or practical application. So just I will call them Y1 and Y2 for now. Now the idea start like follows. I'm gonna just duplicate this to the right hand side. So basically I'm going to draw in a picture to show you there are two important sides of research design. The first side is to investigate the actual causational or the cause and the effect, and it's called causational. And the other side, way of observing phenomena, and called observational. Now, what differentiates these two spaces the follow. In this side, the actual fact that if I conduct a research and my design focus on causational, that means cause and effect. I think this vector or the teacher's background affects the way that the teacher would choose one of those teaching methods, and the choice of one of those teaching methods could have an effect on the student performance. So the line actually go by investigating the cause, and this is the effect, and then again I'm investigating another cause, and this is the effect. So it's quite clear from the image that I believe those X1 and X2 and 3 and M might cause the choice of the T1, T2, and T3. And I think that the cause of choice of T1, 2, or 3 will also lead to the result of Y1, Y2, and Y3. So the idea was that any of those X as a cause of T as a cause of Y. And this relational is called causational research design. On the other hand, the observational space, it says that I want to observe the relation between X and T. So I am observing. Then I want to observe the relation between T and Y. Once again, I am observing. So in this case, I want to observe X and its relational with T. Then I want to observe T and its relation to Y. So I hope this illustrative visualization shows you the difference between causational and observational. Now, academically speaking, causational, it focuses on the principle of cause and effect, and it describes how X has effect on T and how T has effect on Y. On the other hand, observational, it focuses on the principle of observing and describing. So in other words, I observe if X really has effect on T or not, and I observe if T has an effect on Y or not. And the measurement on this case is given once only. Later, those academic and visual presentation will be clear when we apply them in our second lab. But for time being, having you decided, as we earlier stated, on your research methodology or paradigm, either quantitative or qualitative, you have also to decide on your research design. And the group of research design, as we have shown just now, could be causational, and that is to investigate the cause and effect. Now, one way to implement that is by using experimental or quasi-experimental. And literally, what is the actual idea of experimental or quasi-experimental? It goes as follows. Let's assume I have two groups of students, and those two groups of students, their performance is pre-known to me. In other words, I know, for example, this group has poor performance and this group of students have an excellent performance. So since my claim says that teaching methods has effects on a student's performance, what I would do, I would construct a timeline to start to manipulate those teaching methods by applying them on different time on each group. For example, I would choose one of those teaching methods. I start with the first teaching method and I apply it on the two group. So this is for T1. Then I apply it in the first group and I apply it also on the second group within this timeline. After the end of this timeline, I go back and I check how is the performance for both groups. If I see any change on the poor group in, for example, in a certain direction, maybe it become better, and if it's worse, I'm not sure that it can be worse than poor, but anyway, that seems to be that this teaching method has a positive effect maybe on the poor performance. Same thing happen on the good or the excellent performance, but in this case maybe there are two possible directions. Maybe the performance will keep better as it is excellent, so maybe the teaching method didn't really contribute much because they are already excellent. But if otherwise, maybe this teaching method could also affect the excellent performance to be poor. So we could see this is the first actual type or method of implementing, and this is called experimental implementation of cause and effect. But there is one important thing to observe, that I have already known the performance of each of these groups, so I have a prior knowledge on that. But let's assume I have two groups of a student, that's a group 1 and that's a group 2, but I don't really know what is the actual performance. They are new, they have just joined, and I don't have a prior knowledge. This kind of experiment, which follow the same exact concept here, is called a quasi-experiment. And obviously, the difference, as we said, that I don't know the real performance of this group. I would follow the same thing. So what happens? I take the teaching methods, one, for example, which is under investigation, and I apply it on two groups, again within a certain timeline, and then by the end of this timeline I would measure the performance and I would see whether the performance of these students are different from each other or not. So what happens if it happens to be a good performance, for example, poor performance, and maybe the other one happens to be excellent performance? I cannot still reach out to the conclusion to say now this method is affecting in a poor or an excellent way. But what I would do, I would take the same two groups and transfer them once again to the second step of normal experimental. So you see now how the experimental part could be most likely driven from the quasi-experimental approach. Just one more time in a conclusion, and maybe I'm repeating myself, but for a reason, that whenever you have to investigate on a certain final results, like in this case I want to investigate student performance and its relation to teaching methods. In case the student performance of the group that I'm investigating is unknown, their performance already, so I have to go to quasi-experimental, yet then I can confirm what I reach using experimental. But if I already know, so I don't have to go to quasi-experimental, but I can directly go to the experimental stage. Now, on the second part is the observational. We can use two different methods. It's called descriptive and correlational. So once again, in the illustrative image we have here, if I would have to differentiate between the two methods, it goes as follows. I would choose, for example, a group 1 maybe, and maybe group 2. It doesn't really matter how many group you choose, but what really happens is after you measure the variables for the number of group, many as you like, what happens if I am just observing whether there is a relation between the teaching methods and the student performance. This kind of investigation or line of investigation is called a correlational. So in this case, I report whether a correlation exists between student performance and teaching method. But if I take this a step further, after I discover the correlation, if I would like to know, is this correlation happens to be positive or negative? In other words, if this teaching method affects the performance in a positive way or in a negative way, this line is called then descriptive. So one more last time, although I am repeating myself once again just to clarify, if I am in the observational world of research design, by choosing any number of group of students doesn't really matter. I am not comparing between the groups, but actually I am just observing each group individually by measuring their variables, and based on that I try to find the correlational between the two elements that I'm investigating, in this case the effect of teaching method on student performance. If I would love to find this correlation either in a positive or in a negative direction, then this method is called descriptive. So we have seen the two different research design in terms of causational and observational. We have left to quickly just show you some category of research design, and those are an academic actual terminologies. Doesn't really add much to your knowledge, but it's good that you should know that by the end of your research and the kind of research design you are doing, if it is a generalized design, mean your research or design is aimed in a general term. It means you might have many different group of students from many different institutions, maybe across different country or districts. So the finding will be kind of a generalized because you were not doing to a specific institution. But if the case happens that you are designing or you're doing your research for a specific institution, that kind of design could be in the form of a case study. Ethnography, the name could be intuitive on its own. If you target a specific class or specific group or specific ethnic group, then in this kind of research design is called the ethnography. It could be a grounded theory, and that's aimed to develop a theory inductively by systematically analyzing the qualitative data that you have. And finally, the phenomenology, and that aims to understand phenomenon or even describing a participant's living experience. That's the end of the last section of Chapter 5, Framework and Research Design. And we have reached out to a quick conclusion on what we have learned so far. I will see you then.